In this video, I'm going to show you how to use a pre-trained AI model to categorize news about stocks, which can be used not only to analyze what people are thinking about a stock, but also to create indicators for potential price movements. Now, this is a really cool technique and it's super easy to get started, as you'll see in just a second. So we're going to begin by importing the libraries that we're going to be using for this video. So the first one is pandas. The second one is the transformers library, and we're going to import the pipeline from the transformers library. I'll link this in the description below. And then finally, and this is an optional library, but I'm going to use TQDM, which is a progress bar library for Python. I'm also going to activate the pandas extension just so that when we do some computations on pandas data frames, we can add a progress bar. So I'm going to run that and load in all of our libraries. So now that's done, we can load in our data. So the data that we're going to be using for this video is news data for Apple over the course of this year so far and also halfway through 2024. So let's run that now. So as always, all of the data will be available in the GitHub along with all of the code. So you can find that there. So we've just defined a variable called news data and we're reading this in with pandas. Now let's have a look at that data so we can see what it looks like. Now I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so we can see better this data. So we can see that we've obviously got the symbol, which is Apple. We've got the date that the news was published. We've got the title. Now for this video, we're going to be working with the titles. There's also the text here. Now you could also take the URL from the news article and do some web scraping. For the purposes of this video and just to show you how this AI model works, I'm going to focus on just using the title, but feel free to use other text. So the next thing I'm going to do is load in the model that we're going to be using for this video. So I'm just going to zoom out again so we can see it easier. So we're going to be using the pipeline that we imported at the top with the transformers library. We're going to set the task as zero-shot classification. And the model we're going to be using is from Facebook, and it's this BART large MNLI model. And this is a model specific for zero-shot classification. Now just to explain what zero-shot classification is, so this is a pre-trained model, and what it allows us to do is it allows us to input a sequence of text, like a sentence or a paragraph, and then alongside that we can input some labels. So that could be something like positive or negative if we wanted to categorize some sentiment. It could be something like bullish or bearish, which is going to be more relevant for us. It could be really anything, and you can supply as many labels as you wish. And what the zero-shot classification model is going to do is it's going to output a probability score next to each one of these labels based on how relevant that label is for the input text you provided, be that a paragraph or a sentence or whatever it might be. So let's run that so we can load that in. So the first thing I want to do is I just want to inspect a news headline within our data. So we can see that we've got Apple teams up with Alibaba for AI. Analyst says edge device integration could boost growth, right? So this is quite a positive title. What I'm going to do is I'm going to define some of these labels that we perhaps would want to classify this news headline into. So I'm going to say candidate labels equals bullish and bearish. And what I want the zero-shot classification model to do is to categorize this into either bullish or bearish. Now to do this, I can reference our classifier up here. So I can say classifier and input the specific news headline here, along with the candidate labels I've defined here. And I'm going to run this and show you what the output of that looks like. So we can see this outputs a dictionary. So we have our sequence here, which is our input sequence, the news headline. We have our labels, bullish and bearish, and then we have our scores. So this is the probability of a particular label being relevant to the sequence. So we can see that bullish has almost 100% chance of being relevant for this sequence, which is exactly what we would expect, right? This is a very positive news headline. They're saying it could boost growth. This is a news headline that has bullish sentiment. Now let's have a look at some other news headlines. So there was one I found which is more geopolitical. This could also be bearish. But what I wanted to do was to add another candidate label to this, which would be geopolitical. And then we can put that directly into here, as we did before with this specific news headline. And obviously we're going to expect that this is on the bearish side, and also there's some probability that it is a geopolitical event. Now, it may be more useful to remove these labels and simply say, is this a geopolitical event or is this a non-geopolitical event? Because what we can do is we can send the same news headline into lots of different classifications to create multiple tags for the same headline. So we can see that here we have a 93.5% of this being geopolitical, which is what we would expect. Now, something else to consider, if we wanted to turn this into an indicator to actually use in a backtest, we want the news headline to be based on some sort of speculation, right? We don't necessarily want it to be based on something that's already happened, because that's in the past, right? It's already happened. The market has already priced that in. But if we can collate the sentiment of all of the news articles that are speculative, then perhaps we might have something useful that could be used to create an indicator with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste this down below, and let's have a label called prediction and another label called reporting. And then let's have another one which is other, just in case it doesn't fit into these two categories here. Now we're going to use the same headline we had before. So this is something that, well, it's being reported that Apple shares have fallen, but the concern that the tariffs on China will hit the profit is something that is more of a prediction. So if I run this now, and we can see that the model shares the same viewpoint as me in terms of, it's generally reporting something, right? This is with the almost 64% likelihood, but then there's a 20% likelihood that this is also a prediction as well, and then 16% that it's other. But I would say the main focus of this headline is that it's something that's being reported, right? Apple shares have fallen. Now that we've had a play around with this model and we've understood how it works and potentially how we can use it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up 4 different classifiers and send each news headline through each of the classifiers so that we can generate multiple different labels for each of the headlines. So the first is going to be sentiment labels. So we want to know whether the headline is positive, negative, or neutral. Now, we're likely going to see that this is going to correlate with the labels of the market sentiment, so bullish, bearish, or neutral, which I'm going to add below this. I'm going to add some economic labels. So for now, I'm just going to have geopolitical and non-geopolitical. And then we're going to have our outlook labels, right? So either it's a prediction or it's already happened, or it doesn't fit into those two categories, so it's other. So I'm going to run this now to define those. And now what we can do is we can have, say, the sentiment labels and plug that into one of our news headlines and see the output in terms of basic, positive, neutral, or negative. So we can see that this is positive with a almost 96% likelihood, and this was also bullish as we saw above as well. So let's just run that again for the market labels. So we can see that it's changed slightly from the first time we ran this. In fact, so we didn't have neutral the first time, right? So that's why the probability is slightly lower, but it's still very high nonetheless. Now we can also look at the economic labels to see whether this is classified as a geopolitical or non-geopolitical event. Now obviously it's a non-geopolitical event, right? It's purely based on these two companies. But then you could argue that there's a very small percent chance, 8% chance here, so not actually that small, but 8% chance that the fact that Apple are teaming up with a Chinese company could have some geopolitical implications as well. And then finally, we've got our outlook labels. So we can see whether this is other, a prediction, or something that's already happened. Now we can see here that the model is actually a bit confused as to whether this is something that has already happened, or it's a prediction, or it's it's something else. So that's why it's gone with other here with a 44.7% chance. Now I was hoping that other would be lower, because this is actually both a prediction and something that's already happened. So Apple has teamed up with Alibaba, so that's already happened. And then an analyst says that the edge device integration could boost growth, right? So that's a prediction. We could look at one of the other headlines just to see whether it can classify that correctly. So we can see again, similar situation here, and a lot of the headlines tend to be kind of structured in a way that it will report something that has happened. So for example, Apple down 7%, but then it will also provide a hook, right? Something that makes you want to click on the article, right? Buy or hold the stock, right? This is more of a prediction, or at least the contents of the article with regards to that statement will be a prediction. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to create a sample of this news data. So I'm just going to take the top 20 rows, and I'm going to keep just the published date and the title. Now the reason I'm going to do this is because I want to run each of these classifiers on all of these titles, but I don't want to do it on the entire data just because we have quite a lot and it will take quite a lot of time. So we've got almost 1,700. So I've created this news data sample of 20, and I'm going to create a new cell. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a new column called sentiment. So this is for the first set of labels for the sentiment analysis, right? Positive or negative. And I'm going to take the title column here, and I'm going to apply this progress apply. So this comes from the TQDM pandas extension. You can just have apply if you're not going to use that. And then I'm going to add a lambda function, so lambda x colon, and then I'm going to call the classifier function. X is just the title, and then we're going to insert our sentiment labels. We're going to extract the labels from the dictionary that returns, and then take the first label from that, right? So we're referencing labels here, and then we're taking the first one in this list because the first one is the one with the highest probability. So I'm going to run that, and we can look at the output after. So now that's finished running, I'm going to insert a cell below. I'm going to have a look at the output. So we can see that we've got our publish date, our title, as we had before, but we've also got this sentiment column now, which contains the sentiment for each title. So this is quite useful in itself, right? You know, you could build a technical indicator based on this column alone. You could plot the sentiment on a graph at different points in time and see whether there's a relationship between the different sentiment and what happens with the price. Now, it's important to consider here whether the news headline is something that's already happened or it's a speculation, like I mentioned before, which is why it's really useful to include all of these other classifiers as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that below. So I'm going to create something similar. So we're going to have one column, which is market outlook. So this is using our market labels. So this was bullish, bearish, or neutral. And then we're going to have our economic labels, so geopolitical or non-geopolitical, and then our outlook labels. So prediction, already happened, or other. And I'm going to call that article nature. I'm going to run that. So now this is finished running, we can have a look at the results. So we can see that we've got all of the columns that we added before. So we've got our sentiment as before, we've got our market outlook, so bearish, bullish. Then our economic nature of the article, so geopolitical or non-geopolitical. And then the article nature, right? Is it prediction? Has it already happened? Or is it other? Now, for an indicator, if we turn this into an indicator, we might want to filter out articles that report on something that's already happened and focus purely on the ones that are more of a prediction so that we can aggregate the sentiment of speculative articles. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing in the next video. So I'm going to run this on the entire set, and we're going to turn this into an actual indicator that could be used to help us predict the direction of the stock, and we're going to run a back test and see what happens there. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that. But that's everything for today's video. As always, the code and the data will be available on GitHub, so you can find it there. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please give the video a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.